slips through the door, getting rich off the blood of the fighting poor. Well, that's your democracy, one big hypocrisy. You want me to give my life for country. They say sacrifice yourself today, but don't think about getting in their way. Camouflaged in black and green, you want more gear in the war machine. Consequences so severe, so pull your trigger quickly, dear. Our patriots are acting up, let's punish them with fear. Hey! And the walls come crashing down as parades and speeds march on your town. They count your votes, they bought the dream, paid in full by the war machine. So you see the plan, an endless war, a profit scam. The system's right, the news you read, propaganda plants your seeds in the mindless love of a generation captivated, trained, entertained, and held in bondage. Walls come crashing in like a plague. They will blame it on our sins. The choice is posed by men unseen. Give yourself to the war machine. Thank you so much.
I have no problem yanking him out of the situation.
You should see the husky.
I played that at a Tea Party rally in Cincinnati in 2011. About 12,000 people were there, and about 12 people clapped for that song. I was proud of that, actually. So this last song is it's called Liberty, and for me it was really my part in the whole in the Ron Paul revolution. This was the theme song for me, and I wrote this after being called out that I wasn't writing any songs that asked any questions. That those are the songs that matter, and that's how you change people's minds and hearts. Is you ask them the right question. And so I wrote a song full of questions. And before we do this, I want to give a good shout out to my good friend Richard Grove, who founded Autonomy, who's the host of the Grand Theft World podcast, and he made it possible for me to be here. I live out on the West Coast, and they sponsored me to come out here to be with you guys today. Check out getautonomy.info. Write that website down. It'll change your life. Trade in your state-sponsored indoctrination for a real education. Getautonomy.info. So thanks a lot, Richard. Sit down when all should be standing? And why do we back down at the critical moment? Like running away from the waves of the ocean, we head for the hills with the high tide approaching. As sand slips away from the castle, when it's time to stand upright, Why do we falter by placing our freedom on the sacrificial altar? We hold tight to our fears and defend our oppressors as we fight for their lives and become the transgressors, as pacifists transform to violent aggressors. But I'm only a stranger here, and I'm a long, long way from my home. And they say I can't change all the things I find strange, for what can one man do alone? They say, what can one man do alone? Is the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to fear creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Oh, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through faces of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Oh, I'm only a stranger here, and I'm a long, long way from my home. And they say I can't change all the things I find strange, but what can one man do alone? They say, what can one man do alone? Only a stranger looking to find better nature in my fellow man. But they keep telling me it's a sin to be free, and that's more than I'm willing to stand.
Everything on this side is connected.
Where will you be when the order is given to censor your mind, as free speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world sent to prison, shut by the sound of a bellowing thunder, and choke on the blood of a train going under? As arrogant men tear up our Constitution, and from every direction we cry revolution, standing together and without permission, soldiers for truth in the war of attrition, the love of our children is our ammunition. I'm only a stranger here, and I'm a long, long way from my home. But I'm going to change all the things I find strange, for I'm not one man alone. Yes, I'm only a stranger. I'm a long way from my home. And I'm going to change all the things I find strange, for I know that I'm not alone. Yes, I know I'm not alone. Not alone. You are not alone, and we're with you. God bless you all.
Peace,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you very much for having us. Jordan Page, Tatiana Rose.
Tatiana Rose.
Can't wait to the next speaker. Thank you so much, you guys.
liberty and peace, which is something that we all really need. Our next speaker is the editor of the Libertarian Institute, the editorial editor, director of antiwar.com, and author of Enough Already. Let's welcome to the stage Scott Horton. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out today. The Russia-Ukraine war is a catastrophe. There's a very real risk that the war could grow out of control into a major power conflict between NATO and Russia. A war which could kill billions of people. We demand a ceasefire and negotiations now. And yes, this war was provoked. That's the title of the book I'm working on now. It's 540 pages so far, and that's the abridged version. Here's the even shorter version. Bush Sr. made a promise at the end of the Cold War not to extend the NATO military alliance east into the former Warsaw Pact states. But he was lying. It was a promise that was made to be broken. When Bill Clinton came in, he inflicted a policy called shock therapy on the Russian economy, which absolutely destroyed it and led to the deaths of millions, literally millions of excess deaths in the 1990s. He also rigged the election of 1996 to prevent the people of Russia from throwing out Boris Yeltsin, who had helped the Americans to inflict this policy on them. He also backed bin Laden's Mujahideen in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And he expanded NATO in 1999, bringing in Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. The great Ron Paul, congressman from Texas, at the time warned that this would not strengthen NATO, but weaken it by provoking right-wing nationalist ethnic backlash against the new order in Europe.
This is Ron Paul.
W. Bush sponsored color-coded revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you.
He brought 9 more nations into NATO, and in 2008 at Bucharest promised to bring Ukraine and Georgia into America's military alliance as well. He also tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty and installed Mark 41 missile launchers in Romania and Poland, which are dual-use launchers that can hold Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be tipped with hydrogen bombs, violating the spirit of the INF Treaty. Barack Obama did a lot of things, but the worst thing that he did was he overthrew the government of Ukraine for the second time in 10 years in 2014 in the phony Maidan Revolution, which was really a coup accomplished by no-fooling, Hitler-loving Nazis on the ground. Now, Donald Trump came in and was falsely accused of being a pro-Russian traitor, so what did he do? He poured hundreds of millions of dollars worth of arms into Ukraine to prove that it wasn't so. He sent more trainers and added more sanctions on Russia. And whether he was in on it or not, his government tried to overthrow the government of Belarus in 2020. He also increased naval exercises in the Black and Baltic and Oshkosh Seas and Air Force exercises over Europe. He also, on his way out, Donald Trump tore up Ronald Reagan's great achievement, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty of 1987, and George Bush Sr.'s great achievement, the Open Skies Treaty of 1992. Joe Biden has has been bad on every bit of this the whole time. As a United States Senator, as Vice President, where he oversaw the 2014 coup, and as President of the United States, where he spent his first year in office, 2021, pouring more arms into Ukraine, reiterating promises to bring them into the NATO alliance, and increasing military interoperability between their military and ours, making them essentially a de facto member of NATO. Now, the Biden administration told the media that they were carefully calibrating the amount of weapons that they were pouring into Ukraine in order to deter Russia from attacking without provoking them into doing so. Now, either they're really terrible at calibration and deciding just how many weapons to pour in to prevent a war, or they were lying about that and they were trying to cause a war. And even though that might sound a little conspiratorial, there's very good reason to think so. It's clear that in the run-up to the war, the Biden administration refused to engage in any real diplomacy to prevent it from happening. And not only that, interfered with peace talks in March and April of last year, which could have brought an early end to the war. Still, this war was not inevitable. Vladimir Putin and his men obviously have their share in the responsibility here. However, the U.S. did so much to cause this war and prevent earlier talks to end it. They must be made to seek compromise now. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, and the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, have both said that it's time for Ukraine to quit this war while they're behind before they get too much further behind. Officials told the Washington Post 2 months ago that they understand Ukraine cannot win this war. They just want to prolong it a little bit longer before the peace talks. Well, that's just not good enough. They cannot win. They should be talking to end the war now. Now, some of you might be familiar with a study from 2019 put out by the Rand Corporation. It was called Extending Russia, Overextending Russia. It was all about how to provoke Russia into expensive new commitments in Syria, in Central Asia, and including in Ukraine. But the point I want to bring up to you from that Rand study that was pleasantly surprising to me was how often they bring up the importance of public opinion in that study. Well, we would like to do X, but the people of Germany are against it. We'd like to do Y, but the people of France won't stand for it. We think we'd like to push this far, but public opinion polls in America say that the people will not tolerate it. You might not have thought that they cared about what we thought at all, but they do. They know that we have the power to make them stop. So it is up to us, the American people. Our government is risking a nuclear war over a country they're not even willing, so far, to deploy ground troops to. It's madness. We, the people, demand talks. Negotiate now. End this war. Thank you.
Scott Horton! All right. Thank Thank you, Scott. Next up, we have someone who embodies the courage that everyone in the government, everyone in the military-industrial complex needs to show, and that is Ann Wright, because in 2003, in the lead-up to the Iraq War, Ann resigned from the State Department. She resigned rather than go along with the Iraq War. That's the kind of courage we need, the kind of courage that Snowden showed, that so many others have shown, that have stepped down. Ann, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's so good to see all of you out here. It's time to end these goddamn wars. End the wars. And it's also time to free Julian Assange. Free Julian. And on April 11th, right here in Washington, D.C., is going to be another great event to free Julian Assange. So if you live here, be looking out for the announcement of where it's going to be. If you don't live here, we'll get to you somehow. Anyway, my name's Ann Wright. I'm a retired Army colonel, 29 years. No, stay right up here. 29 years. Julian would be proud of us. His family's proud of us to making sure that we remember him as a truth teller on all sorts of issues. And one of them was the Iraq War that I resigned over almost 20 years ago next month. I was one of 3 diplomats that resigned in opposition to the war in Iraq. And if I had another resignation to give, I'd give it on this one. Everybody ought to resigning on these wars. I mean, it's just to think that all these nations say it's our national security, therefore we have to invade and kill other people. It's just plain wrong. It's plain wrong. And if you look at other things that are going on, I live in Hawaii, and that's halfway to China, and guess what's going on there? The provocations that the U.S. government is doing on China, we need to be protesting that. Let's prevent that war. We were unable to prevent this war that's going on in Ukraine. So we got a lot of work to do. There are lots of countries that are saying we don't want to have this war going on because we know what can happen. It can be a war that starts over the whole world. I mean, the use of nuclear weapons, it's already been talked about. When the elephants are stomping around, it's the little people that get hurt, and it's all us little people all over the world that get hurt unless we can get this thing stopped. So the reason we're here is saying that there need to be negotiations. I mean, there needs to be talk. There needs to be dialogue. It sounds kind of simple. It's kind of like school, isn't it? You know, when the bullies start pestering people, you have to sit them down and let's talk this thing out. So, what can you do to help this happen? Well, if you're going to be in town on Tuesday, you can join us at the U.S. Congress to go after our Congress people that are just as big a warmongers as every one of these administrations, presidential administrations. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat administration, they're all for war. They're all for the merchants of death that give them money to keep their campaigns going. So, if you're in town at 9:30 on Tuesday, join us over at the Rayburn Building, and we will go to the offices of a lot of Congress people. So please join us there, and at the end of this, I will just say, no more war! No more war! No more war! No more war! Thank you very much. Woo.
Next up, we've got someone who I'm sure most of you know, and that is host of the Combo Couch, Pasta Jardula. Pasta, it's yours. Take it away, man.
Yo, let's give it up for Nick Brown and Angela for putting this on. And let's go with the flow. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Say it again. Free Julian Assange. All right, before we get started, I need everybody to take their phone out really quickly and mark yourself safe from a Chinese spy balloon. Can you do that real quick? Go ahead there. So, who knows about General Smedley Butler out here? Right? I can't believe nobody's even mentioned him today. War is a racket. He gave a speech almost 90 years ago, and General Smedley Butler was a senior Marine Corps officer who fought both the Mexican Revolutionary War and World War I. At the time of his death, Butler was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. During his 34-year career, He participated in military actions in the Philippines, China, Central America, the Caribbean, and France. But later in his years, Butler became an outspoken critic of the wars and their consequences. In 1935, he gave this beautiful speech called War is a Racket. Just going to read the first paragraph. It says, "War is a racket. It has always been. It is possibly the oldest and easiest, most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one which profits are reckoned in dollars and losses in lives. A racket can be best described as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. It is only a small inside group that knows what it's about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few and at the expense of the many. Out of war, few people make huge fortunes." And the crazy thing is it's the same today as it was back then. War is still a racket. As it was a racket in Vietnam, when the government lied to us about the Gulf of Tonkin. False flags incite and appear to justify war. Don't be fooled, they're still doing it today. But companies like Dow Chemical made millions producing dangerous gases used to suffocate and kill the women and children of Vietnam, destroy their agriculture and their civilization. Has anybody ever heard of napalm? Dow Chemical. And did I mention that all wars are bankers' wars? Let me hear you say it. All wars are bankers' wars. And war is still a racket. As it was in Nicaragua when the CIA conducted a civil war by selling crack cocaine in the United States. They killed black people at home and brown people in Latin America. The prison industrial complex exploded. It's increased almost 700% since the 1970s with mandatory minimums. Tell me, is war still a racket? And did I also mention that all wars are bankers' wars? You're damn straight over there. And war is still a racket. The same way it was in Iraq. When people refused to deal with the fact that Saddam did not have chemicals and weapons. Okay? One man tried to stop the war, but it didn't happen. So I say, all wars are still bankers' wars. Are they not? You're damn straight. Now the first thing we have to do is realize that we have no friends here in Washington. For we have a Congress that is more like professional wrestling. The Democrats. And no, let me say this much. They are not the lesser of two evils. These parties, they appear to be oppositions, but they're really not. And what are the Democrats? They are the let's send weapons to Ukraine Democrats, the let's invade Haiti Democrats, the let's sanction the hell out of Syria Democrats, the, oh, I like this one, the we came, we saw, he died Democrats. They're also, the CIA and the FBI are now the good guy Democrats. Basically, they are the Trump derangement syndrome Democrats. In other words, they're just the synthetic left. And the Republicans, are they really any better? Really? I mean, let's not forget that this Ukraine war wouldn't have started if it wasn't for Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell going to Ukraine in 2016 and then talking to Nazis to go invade the Donbass. Mitch McConnell was just seeing Zelensky last year in a delegation with the Republicans. Let's not forget, they're also the Afghan war and the Iraq war Republicans. Let's sanction the hell out of the Nicaraguans, Venezuela, and Cuba because they're socialist Republicans. The let's take on China because of a balloon Republicans. They are, in essence, we still remember who you are, Republicans. And yes, Matt Gaetz is now floating a bill out there to end the Ukraine war, and that's great. You want to end war, so be it. I'm all for it. Frankly, I think you're a little bit too late because almost 250,000 people are dead. But let me just say this to the Republicans out there right now. Don't think for 1 second For 1 second, we're like... Let me hear you say it. So here's my speech. It's all messed up as the wind is blowing, but let me just finish up with this. Let's just ditch it. So this is the hard part, right? We understand what we're up against. We understand that we have no friends here in Washington. So what do? What do we do? This hasn't been the first time this has happened before. They had major protests against the Iraq War. They had major protests against Vietnam. But yet, we're back to where we started from. And I know it's kind of trite to say, hey, we got to come together, but we must. The ruling class has definitely separated us. They got us fighting against each other. So all we can do is get in there and get dirty and have some robust discourse. We gotta cancel culture. We gotta forget about our isms and talk. We can't play red team, blue team anymore, because if we do, we'll surely die. So I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. Remember that all wars are bankers' wars, and let's do the work. Let's come together. Let's love, let's fight back, and let's rage against the war machine. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that energy and that strong message. Up next, we have investigative journalist Wyatt Reed. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible crowd. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see so many people from so many different walks of life unite today to come out and say it's time for Washington to stop prolonging this war in Ukraine. And it's such an honor to speak alongside so many incredible anti-war figures. People like Dennis Kucinich, Ron Paul, people who've been, yeah, let's hear it for them. These are people who've been working to bring an end to endless wars since before I was born. And today we're here to make sure our kids don't have to do the same thing tomorrow. The thing about war is that in America, sometimes it can seem so abstract to us, like it could never hit home here. But it can, and it does. You know, I grew up in Southwest Virginia, down the river from the Radford Arsenal, where all the propellants used in American rockets and artillery shells are produced. And every month, they burn the explosive waste and they dump that sludge into the New River. So, when I grew up, we just got used to the fish in the river with tumors that were bigger than their heads. We got used to our dad's buddies dying in unexplained explosions. We got used to our friends getting thyroid cancer in their late 20s. And it wasn't until I saw this war in Ukraine up close, and I was on the receiving end of these American shells, that we are killing our own people at home to produce, that it came full circle for me. Thank you. When I was asked to speak today, I knew immediately what I wanted to talk about, and that's because for close to a month, I got a chance to see and experience for myself exactly what those people have been going through. And not just since last February, but for 9 whole years. Nearly 15,000 people in these autonomous regions were killed before Russia got directly involved in this war last February. Now, since then, hundreds more civilians have been killed there as the Zelensky regime stepped up its bombing of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. intentionally targeting civilian areas and residential buildings in what I can only describe as state terrorism. I don't say this lightly, but it's the only conclusion I can draw after seeing the reality on the ground up close. I say that because within 2 hours of arriving in downtown Donetsk, I watched firsthand as my hotel was hit in an artillery strike 100 yards directly in front of me, with what I later found out was a NATO standard 155 millimeter shell launched by Ukrainian militants. I say it because I was able to get access to frontline towns and interview those who survived the occupation of their towns by the hyper-violent nationalists, groups with names like Azov, Adar, Right Sector, groups that were universally acknowledged as Nazis until last year. That's right. Nobody I spoke with who survived their reign of terror described them as liberators. Instead, they used words like fascists, killers, brutes. I say state terror because of Natalia, the 68-year-old babushka I met, who was left crippled when the Ukrainian military bombed her apartment with a U.S.-built HIMARS rocket. With no cell service, she told me she looks up at the faded photos of her children on the walls of her ruined apartment and tells them to look at what's become of her life. We asked her what she thought of Americans, knowing we supplied the Ukrainian militants with those bombs. She said, they must be beasts, they must not be human, they must have no heart. And I wished so badly that I could tell her otherwise, but how could I? Well, I'm looking out at this crowd today, and now I think I can. Finally, Americans are uniting to say enough is enough. If you think lives like Natalia's matter too, if you think it's time to put an end to Ukrainian boys and men getting slaughtered after being conscripted at gunpoint, if you think it's time to stop sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives to try to overthrow the Russian government and send a message to China that it's time to stop the endless escalations towards all-out nuclear war, then it's time to stand up. It's time to stand with the people of the Donbass. Stand with the other Ukrainians too. The Russian speakers in the East who are banned from mainstream media airwaves, who've been systematically silenced and erased since the U.S.-backed coup in 2014. So spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your member of Congress, stop pouring gas on the fire. Stop sabotaging the peace deals. Not a single penny more for these war criminals. Let's have peace for the people of Donbass. It's time for negotiations, not nuclear weapons. Thank you.
White Reed! Woo! All right. So just so everybody knows, of course, and I think everybody does, after this, we're not just going to deliver the anti-war message here. We are going to march to the White House. But first, we have a long-time staple of the anti-war movement, long-time anti-war activist, and that is David Swanson. He is the co-founder and executive director of World Beyond War. David Swanson.
Thank you, Nick. I want to say thank you to everybody here today, and especially to those of you who have been here to oppose every war, or who are now committed to opposing every war. This Lincoln Memorial glorifies a war of long ago, and it really doesn't matter what our various opinions are on the wisdom of the U.S. having used war, unlike much of the rest of the world, as a tool against slavery. As long as today, state after state is removing the exception that allows slavery as punishment for a crime, simply by passing legislation without first picking out some big fields and slaughtering lots of people. I haven't read a single proposal to end mass incarceration that says the first step should be mass murder and leveling cities, and the second step banning mass incarceration. Today we know enough to jump straight to the useful goal without using it to justify war. Today we have more effective tools than war to bring about change. Like it or not, we have progressed somewhat, but only somewhat. It is always nice to have new people oppose a new war, but sad to see people who opposed a past war support a new one. Because if we ever want to mobilize the activism required to defund the most expensive and destructive institution ever created, the U.S. military, we will have to come to an understanding that the problem is not any particular war. The problem is not any side of any particular war. The problem, the only thing we should be calling an enemy, is the very idea that there can be a right side in the toxic tango of organized mass murder that is every war. I'm not here to demand that the U.S. stop arming Ukraine in order to aid me or those near me. The money, buying the weapons to ship to Ukraine and to prepare for yet more wars, is making Ukraine worse off, not better, while risking nuclear apocalypse for us all, and could instead, if spent wisely, be a major benefit not just to this country, but to the world. The U.S. government is blocking peace in Ukraine and telling you that it is only Ukraine demanding that the war go on, but you're not falling for that, are you? The massive rallies of 40 years ago against nuclear weapons disappeared, along with most of the weapons. But enough weapons remained to end life on Earth, and the risk of that is rising. And the only way out of it, is the abolition of war and of nuclear weapons. I know that supporters of war believe against all evidence, but in line with everything this culture tells them, that war is a wise tool for defense, a belief on which limits are not easily imposed. Everyone is supposed to be welcome to believe whatever they want. But just as with climate denial of the superior power of nonviolence is a belief that will end all other beliefs by ending all life. Our luck cannot hold out. If the nuclear weapons do not get us, the environmental destruction exacerbated by war and the lack of global cooperation impeded by war will. Meanwhile, war fuels bigotry, justifies secrecy, proliferates violence and weaponry, and corrodes our culture, conflating disagreement with murderous enmity. War thinking makes even looking at the facts of nonviolent activism seem like some sort of shameful betrayal. But our choice remains, as when Dr. King said it, between nonviolence and non-existence. Any world we can hope for our children and grandchildren, is a world beyond war. A world perfectly possible if we choose it, in which governments behave with the minimal decency we expect of preschoolers. A world in which we don't litter this new Roman Forum with marble celebrations and phallic eyesores glorifying the greatest orgies of mass murder, but in which we model and praise generosity, humility, understanding, and self-sacrifice without violence. A world we will only get if we place ourselves in the way of business as usual in this town. I leave you with these goals. Russia out of Ukraine. NATO out of existence. The war machine abolished. Peace on our planet. Thank you.
here, and I'm going to call him up. Jose, wherever you are, come up and join us, man. Jose Vega. Who's heard of Jose Vega? Yeah, that's right. Viral videos disrupting AOC, calling her out at her town hall, all these other politicians. What? We need a lot.
Yeah!
So that's what's going to come next. Jose is going to help us train people for that.
Jose!
Angela's going to talk a little bit about it too.
Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be getting ready to go and protest at our congressional representatives' offices. We're going to train you with the help of Jose here so that you can go out and help us affect meaningful change and actually get some bills passed and get some things repealed so that we can get out of this miserable hell machine.
Cedric, here. Why don't you pose? We hold the... Look that way. Look at
All right, so what we're going to be doing in a few weeks from now is we're all here in D.C. now, and we're all going to go back to our congressional districts after this. We're going to go back home, and what we're going to do is we're going to do sit-ins, we're going to have another day of action, but it's going to be back where all of you are. So we're going to do a day of action where everybody's going to go to their member of Congress's house, either their home or their congressional district office. You're going to do a sit-in, you're going to protest there, and we're going to bring it because the war is something that has been brought to our house, hasn't it? We can't avoid the war. We didn't get a vote. None of us voted to start this war, to start a third world war. None of us are cheering for a nuclear war. That's not our choice. Well, they need to feel that. So we're going to bring it right there. And so get ready for that. More coming from that in the next few days. Turning it over to Jose now for a couple minutes.
Okay. Hi, all. Can we hear from Nick and Angela for putting this together? Yeah. I'm really happy to see all of your faces here. And I also want to give thanks to Diane Sayre. She ran against killer Chuck Schumer, and I worked on her campaign. And people always ask me, like, how do you just start doing that? How do you just stand up and start going after politicians? Well, the truth is I'm an American citizen, and I know what that means. There's an old saying that goes, know where you stand, and then stand there. And where are we standing today? 100 years ago, this Lincoln Memorial was constructed. And inside, there's a sentence from the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which says that we highly resolve that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. But how do you actually do that? My answer is we have to be that free government that we intend to preserve, to improve, or to create. We, not our elected representatives, are the fourth branch of government. We are not congressmen. We are not judges. We are not the executive branch. We are more than that. We are the people. We are not a political party. We are the people. And we have the responsibility not to be divided in the face of injustice. What we do in America affects the whole world. So why are we, the people, doing nothing to stop our unjust wars? The bankers of Wall Street, City of London, the bank rollers, and the war profiteers hate you, us, as much as they hate Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping, and maybe more. Judge them by their deeds. And if you don't believe me, look at our cities. They are destroyed. And it's even worse now. I'm from the Bronx in New York City, and we used to say it's burning. But look what's happening in Ohio. It's burning down too. Will you, the people, rise up to stop it? And so to close, I would like to say that we have to listen to other nations and reject the idea that war is a form of diplomacy. Martin Luther King, who spoke here and is with us here in the mall, made the point that there is such a thing as being too late. It is not yet too late, but only if we unite above party, ideology, and personality. We have to establish principles for a new strategic and development architecture that treats all nations equally. And only when we remember that we are the people, that we have the responsibility to reverse injustice, foreign and domestic, will we create something better, a more perfect union. If we do our job, we will be the government that we and the whole world wants to see. So let's get to it.
All right, way to go, Jose Vega. All right. Next up, we have journalist at the Gray Zone, Anya Parampil. Anya, turning it over to you.
Hey everybody! Thank you, Nick. How is everyone today? This is beautiful. I mean, who can hate this country looking out at it? Look how lovely everything is around us. We have a beautiful day. If only all this were used for good instead of evil right here in the heart of the empire. Look at it. Did anyone come here to D.C. in order to get here? Did they cross state lines? Great. I love to see that because the whole point of this is to overcome barriers, not just ideological barriers or physical barriers as well, to come together and say that we're tired of this war, as many of the speakers have mentioned before me. So I'm honored to be here. I want to, as others have, emphasize how inspiring it is to see former presidential candidates, 4 of them, Dr. Jill Stein, Tulsi Gabbard, Ron Paul, and Dennis Kucinich. They each have their own flavor, but they all decided to show up today because they recognize that even though they each come from something different, we don't always get the opportunity to come together and show what this country is actually about, which is what I see in front of me today. I'm also disappointed that there are some people who couldn't share the stage with me today. Is Scott Ritter in the audience? I want to give it up to Scott Ritter. He unfortunately couldn't speak today, but I just want to point out that more than anybody on this stage, Scott is actually someone who knows what it feels like to risk and lose everything, and he did it in order to stand up to the greatest humanitarian catastrophe so far this century, the Iraq War. So thank you, Scott. Unfortunately, even though she's back here with us, you know her and love her. I do too. Medea Benjamin, a legend of the anti-war movement. She couldn't be on stage speaking, and I don't hold that against Medea because I understand what she's up against. But what I do reject are the individuals and the groups who, instead of asking to be a part of this or working with us, having a conversation, they invested all their time into attacking us, smearing us in the most cynical way. And the reality is, building an anti-war movement is not about building anybody's personal vanity political project. It's not about building even necessarily individual parties. It's putting all of that together over the one umbrella of ending the war. We don't have the luxury in the grassroots when we're fighting for something to say that we want to play clubhouse politics and that we want to sit in the same houses, talk to the same people that we've been talking to for, in some cases, decades, other cases, years. And everybody thinks the same, everybody looks the same. That's not fun, that's not growth, and that's definitely not building a movement. So I actually think it's great that people can come together and discuss the areas where they disagree. And, you know, we can debate whether or not teenage girls should have to share locker rooms or compete in athletics against biological males another time. Because the reality is, if the people who run this country right now continue down this path, those other questions aren't even going to matter. They're not going to matter. We all know the stakes of this war. And our job in the grassroots is to understand the stakes of the war and communicate to the people the stakes of the war and the cost of the war. And I mean all the U.S. people, regardless of what they believe in on other issues. We are all affected by this, not just in terms of the taxpayer dollar cost. I mean, we should be communicating to people that the price of gas at the pump, the price of the food they're buying right now is all tied to this war. You think sanctioning Russia's oil means that Russia's not going to make money off their oil? No, it just means we're sanctioning ourselves not able to buy that oil, and then suddenly the price of oil goes up. I wonder why that is. So, it's about communicating the stakes and the real cost to people who might see the war itself as abstract. But it is also, I think, about being serious about what we're actually living through right now. I hear a lot of people talk about the lead up to World War III, and that's what we're experiencing right now. Hello. I would actually argue that we're already living through World War III, because the world war that we are going to experience, or that we are experiencing in our generation, is not of the same nature as the world wars past. There's not trenches. The nature of the war is different. The battle is different. It's a hybrid war. They have economic sanctions that they levy as part of this war. They wage a media war through your mind now, not just on the television, but through social media as well. And there's a proxy war. There's a covert aspect, which is what we're seeing play out in Ukraine. Don't think for a minute that it's a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a war between the United States and Russia. And our leaders openly say it. You've heard them all. The biggest cheerleaders of sending more war to the front line in Ukraine always make this really odd point. They say, no, it actually is a good investment because we can give them the money and they'll fight the war and we don't have to. Haven't you heard that? You've heard them say it over and over again. I heard Hillary Clinton say it. I hear Lindsey Graham make it. And the people who say that, they are so demented because they are openly stating that their whole vision for the war is dependent on their ability to send every last Ukrainian father, son, brother, friend onto the front line. They are happy to fight to the death of the last Ukrainian. The United States is. And so standing here and organizing something like this is actually the real way to stand up for Ukrainian lives, because the war, they are the ones suffering the most. And so that's why it is up to us to be serious about communicating the stakes and the cost. And just to point out one more time that the same system that is responsible for the train derailment in Ohio, where a corporation and the government basically now have nuked an entire U.S. city, is the same system that blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, creating the greatest environmental catastrophe of my lifetime. It's a corporate, oligarchical system. It's a militarist system. It's evil and it's rotten to the core. And when we are clear about those objectives and about the stakes, it's not so hard to put away our differences and to come together and rage against the war machine. So thank you all for doing it. Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you to Nick and Angela once again. And no more war!
Thank you, Anya. Okay, now we have a little teaser for you. Up next, we have Daniel McAdams, co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report and director of the Ron Paul Institute. Thank you so much for being here with us.
They lie. Say it with me. They lie. 20 years ago this month, Colin Powell